Love your city, every back road, every alley, every pothole. Love your city, every back road. Come together, fight for your home.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Love Your City podcast. Communities. This episode, I'm interviewing Treger Strasberg. She's the founder and the CEO of Humble Design, who has furnished over 2,500 homes for over 8,000 hardworking moms, dads, kids, and veterans who are exiting homeless shelters. Thanks for being on the podcast.
It was very succinct, great intro. Loved it.
Thank you. I keep it simple.
I love it.
Keep it simple.
Let me do the talking. I got it.
No, you're up next. You're up next. Here we go. Let's dive in. So I like to start each episode with every single person has some sort of a moment or something that happened in their life that's led them to do the impact work that they're doing. Yeah. Take us back to what that moment was for you that led you into the work that you're doing with Humble Design.
So I like to say, like, my origin story is super lame, but I'm going to try and spice it up a bit, because when people tell the story of how they started organizations, it's usually because they've been touched by homelessness or that they have had
somebody in their family or
some. I was born an empath, so that's not like a good or bad thing. It's just that, like, I have a very easy time putting myself in other people's shoes, and I'm always crying for that reason. I'll definitely cry in this interview, so stay tuned. And so I, in 2008, moved to Michigan from Miami. I had two little kids, and I was in advertising and marketing. I didn't know who was going to hire me in advertising and marketing for the 3 hours that my kids were at daycare. So I went to go volunteer at a nonprofit to keep my graphic design skills up to par while I was being a mom. So I'm at the nonprofit, which is the food rescue, amazing nonprofit called Forgotten Harvest in Detroit. And I have been living in Michigan for, 3 weeks. And I become friends with the woman at the front desk who's like super cheery. Like, we love her earrings. We love her, what she wears. She has kids my kid's age. We talk about stuff over coffee. And she's like super tired, 6 weeks in, right? She's like super tired over coffee. And I'm doing a ton of the talking. Not unusual. But I said, what's going on? And she's like, oh my gosh, the homeless shelter last night was so loud. I didn't get any sleep. It's really hard for the kids and I. And I immediately thought, oh, she's doing like a social experiment. She's like raising money, it's like sleep on the floor challenge, right? No, homeless. Full-time job, 2 kids, my kid's age, and homeless. And I had never, I grew up in like suburbia San Diego. And my dad is an eye doctor. My mom's a college professor. And I had volunteered at, Girl Scouts and served food. But I had never sat across from somebody or known anybody who'd been touched by homelessness, ever. And my world went upside down. And everything I thought I knew about homelessness, I realized in that moment was completely wrong.
What were some of your perceptions of homelessness prior to that?
Well, so homelessness is unless we're educated on homelessness, and some people choose to be educated, some people just are, it's what we see. So what we see when we drive downtown, we see drug addiction, we see chronic homeless, we see mental illness. Those are the things we see, and those are the things that we assume that homelessness is. That is 2% of the population of the homeless sector. The majority of the homeless sector, what you don't see, living in abandoned houses, living in cars, single parents who are just trying to make it. There's 63% of this country is one paycheck away from homelessness. Let that settle in for just a second. Like, that is bizarre. And when you think about that, homelessness really is you and me. We have a 1 in 25 chance of being homeless. We have a 1 in 6 billion chance of being a billionaire. We're way closer to homelessness. Sitting in this room, the 3 of us are way closer to homelessness than we are to being billionaires. I mean, maybe not me, you, of course, are much closer to being a billionaire. You have a lot of drive. But no, so I, in that moment, had this weird upside down moment. And then I cried, because that's what I do. She was able to find housing through a friend in 2008. Detroit housing was easy to come by, thank goodness. And she was able to find housing that she could afford. I went to go visit her in the housing, and it was a beautiful ranch home, and she had made nests on the floor with the kids' coats of where they were sleeping, and was so proud, like so excited that they had this home. And I, again, didn't want to break down in front of her because she's dignified, and I needed to show empathy in that moment. But I went into my car and I bawled, like ugly cried. My husband calls it the peach pit. It's like That's my chin I'm pointing to. And so I went home and I emptied everything out of my own closets that I didn't use, everything out that my kids weren't using. Then I went to my neighbor's house, who I'd never met before, and asked them for all the stuff that they weren't using. And then I am believe it or not, an introvert. I'm working really hard today to be an extrovert, but I'm an introvert. And so it forced me to ask people in my community for things. So within 6 weeks, I had rounded up all this stuff with my friend Anna and her big truck, and we had decorated her whole house. Well,
how were your friends receptive to, like, were you just like, hey, like, I know somebody who just moved in, you explained it, and then you're like, can you pitch in on a couch?
I was like, what do you have in your basement that you're not using? What do you have in the storage that you're not using? Collecting. Oh, yeah. I mean, I have pictures of my garage at the time, which is completely full, but I didn't want to give her just anything. She was my friend. So I was like,
didn't want to do it piece by piece?
I did do it piece by piece back then. We don't do that anymore. But if she wanted a leather couch, I didn't want to give her a purple couch. Like, that's not dignified. She's my friend. So I waited until I found the right couch. And then I was like, oh, she really loves red. I found a red rug. And like, so I pieced it together over 6 weeks. Just an aside, at that moment, my mom came in to visit me for Thanksgiving during that time, and I put her to work in this stranger's house, lining her shelves in her kitchen. And she's like, what am I doing? What's going on? I was like, be quiet, I'm happy. Like, just do it. It makes me happy. So she is a huge supporter now that she understands what I'm actually going for. But so I finished with this woman's house, and people were really receptive. In 2008 in Detroit, people wanted to help, but they didn't know how. Right? 2008 in Detroit was like a big bunch of have and have-nots. And so there was a real line at 8 Mile, but we didn't mix. Those two communities didn't mix at all. So, and when people heard that I was gathering furniture, here's something that they could actually do, like physically do for somebody who really needed it, the stuff was overwhelming. And after the 6 weeks was up, I was known as the furniture lady. And I came home from work or from picking up my kids from daycare and my volunteer opportunity, and there was a couch on my front lawn in suburbia Michigan. So that's not looked at really fondly by my neighbors, like having a couch, like a la King of the Hill style. So I started calling around to try and unload all this extra stuff that I had. I think I'm fast forwarding a lot, but
no, that's great.
Keep going.
No. So what was her reaction? I mean, was she like overwhelmed by the amount of things coming in? Like,
Krista Poole is our first client. She's still my friend. She sits on our Detroit advisory board.
Amazing.
She spoke at our last event, and she is writing our end of year letter this year. And I am embarrassed to say how much she loves us and how much she feels like it changed her life, because I'm not really good at self-congratulatory pats on the back. But boy, she was overwhelmed by the generosity of the community. Let's just say that.
Yeah, that's amazing. Okay, so from that point on, share a little bit of the in-between from you are moved to do this and then you all of a sudden are running a nonprofit. Like, what was the in-between of you going from, okay, I think this was a really special thing in my life, but you're coming from marketing, not interior design, correct?
No, zero. In fact, I'm a terrible interior designer. Everybody out there should know that.
So you went from the marketing, helping a friend out, furnishing her house, to what was the next steps after that toward Humble Design?
So we could yada yada over. So at this point I'm like yada yada yada. Now we have 5 cities, but okay. So if I slow it down, I called 9 homeless shelters, and I'd like to say that this is my parting of the clouds moment. Like meeting with Krista that first time and finding out that she was homeless did turn my world upside down. But you know that moment where like you're like, oh, I think this is what I'm supposed to do with my life.
Wow.
Was when I called the shelters and I said, hey, I have all this stuff that I collected. It's really good stuff. And the people who donated it to me don't want it to be resold. They want it to go directly to a family who's coming out of your shelter. What organization does that? Because I don't want to start anything. I don't know what a charity is at this point. I've worked for one for 6 weeks, you know? So, and all of them said, that is a huge hole in the system. Wow. You should start that. So in my 13 years now of nonprofit work, I have never seen that happen in another instance. A lot of people start nonprofits, which is fantastic. There's 1.5 million nonprofits in the United States. But a lot of times when people ask me for advice, I say, find somebody who's doing what you want to do and join them.
Yeah.
So more times than not, there's something similar to what you want to do. However,
if it's not there,
this program didn't exist, not only in Detroit, but as we found out, it doesn't really exist on a national level either. Now, since World War II, I know this is like a crazy tangent, but since World War II, when our grandma had a coffee table, statistically, she kept it longer than her husband. right? We kept furniture for generations. Now, a coffee table lasts about 3 years in the world of democratization of design. And it ends up where? In the garbage. It's not recycled, right? Furniture is the number one thing that's not recycled, that's in our dumps, or it ends up at Salvation Army or Goodwill. Salvation Army and Goodwill have had the same model since World War II. They are not even prepared for the influx of what is actually coming down the pike. It's massive. And 500,000 people right now are sleeping on the floor that we know about with no furniture. So doesn't it make sense that this massive influx of furniture that's coming our direction, like a fire hose, could be funneled to the people who actually need it? This is the bridge that we had to build.
Yeah, I love it so much. And I love the uniqueness of Humble Design. So what year did you actually launch it?
So Krista Poole was 2008. I filed for my 501c3, which those of you who are new to nonprofit is our nonprofit status, in 2009. So officially we began in 2009.
Nice. And then from that point on, what did your team look like in the early stages? I'm a founder, so I love founding stories, and like all of the hard work and the reality of getting something off the ground is extremely difficult and honorable. And that's why I'm digging into the...
Do you love telling stories of like the failures, like of like those sad, because honestly, for me, that resonates because like I threw a party to raise funds and nobody came. Yeah. Like I was in a ball gown and nobody came. Like that's my favorite story about Humble because it's very relatable for people who are trying to get up and running and think like, I can't do this. Nobody's going to come. Yeah. And I'm like, it happens.
Well, I have a friend who's starting, he's just now starting his entrepreneurial journey, and he called me up recently and he was like, hey, like, I was just wondering what your advice is. Like, I'm just like going on the roller coaster right now. A lot of low lows, high highs. He's like, what's your advice on how you've kind of worked through that over the years? And I'm like, honestly, usually I'm an optimistic person, but I got to say, it's just the repetition of over time. You're going to just have that over and over and over again. And you start to feel a little bit more familiar with getting through difficult things that didn't work out the way that you hoped, and you made it through. And once you do that over and over and over again, you start to become a little more familiar with it, but it doesn't go away. You know, I'm still going through that, you know, in certain areas of my life where I'm like, oh, things didn't work out the way that I hoped. But I have enough experience at this point to know that usually things work out. And a lot of the fear is just existing in my mind. So with your particular founding story, what did the early stages of your team look like? And then what were some of the hurdles and things that you had to like battle through in the early stages just to get this thing off the ground?
So what you just described is what I say is umbrella open, head down, plow forward. You just keep your umbrella open and you move through things. Being a hopeless optimist is what it takes. If you let every single stumbling block or obstacle not teach you a lesson and actually stop you and weigh on you, it's too hard. It's never going to work because how you frame things, like as a learning experience versus basically something that you can't move past. Listen, I stay up till 2:00 in the morning thinking about the stupid thing that I said in a meeting 4 weeks ago. I still do that. But I've always thought like, oh, I can reframe that in my mind as something positive so I can move forward. And that's how I gaslit myself. And also, I would think that knowing too much is a huge, huge problem. You have to have some naive sense of hope and wonder going into any new endeavor, right? So when people would say to me, oh God, you're getting into nonprofit, trust me, you don't want to do that. They had all this knowledge behind them and they were right. I probably didn't want to do it. And if I had all the knowledge that they had and all the experience they had, I probably wouldn't have done it. And what a shame that would have been. I made so many mistakes and fell on my face so many times. And had I had all that knowledge at the beginning, I never would have started this. It would have been too daunting.
Yeah. People ask me all the time, like, hey, if you did it all over again, would you do it all over again if you went back? And I'm like, no. And that's the honest answer with Sackcloth and Ashes. Like, if I went back, I wouldn't do it all over again because I know too much now. Like, I had that naiveness of like, oh, I'm going to go buy a sewing machine. That doesn't make sense. So the hard work in the early stages, you do have to be a little naive and you do have to keep popping open the umbrella and just moving forward.
So I surrounded myself with naive people who I just wanted to hang out with. Like I put an office together of like cool women who were like fun to show YouTube videos to in the morning. Like I enjoyed going in. We had a great time. All of a sudden it occurred to us in like year 3, like, oh, we have to pay employee taxes? What, that's like a thing? I thought we were a nonprofit. We're tax exempt. What are you talking about? No, employee taxes are a real thing. And we found out the hard way that that's something that you have to do. So I think that there were stages that helped me through. The naive stage, definitely awesome to get going. That's why founders like you and I tend to not be CEOs in the long run, because they have so much energy at the beginning part, and then they feel like they can't make that shift over to the responsible, we call it the big girl pants part of our company. And it's a very rare founder that's able to make that shift. But I was determined through education and being really honest with myself and asking for a lot of help to make that transition.
How did you select the families in the early stages, like for those first 3 years?
What a great question.
How did you pick out what families to?
Terribly. Yeah. So we thought we could do it by like having people apply, right? Awesome. Like, just if you need help, here's the application, apply here. That's a whole nother business. Like, I don't know how to like root through those and find out who really needs us. It was a disaster. So we're like, well, who could do this for us? And then we're thinking, we're going to hire people. I'm like, oh my God, we need a social worker. And I was like, I know social workers. They already work for the homeless shelters. So I called the homeless shelter and I talked to one of the social workers there. And I said, do you have families that you know would be, here's what we're looking for. We're looking for a family who's coming out of the homeless shelter who needs almost everything and who would be a good fit for this program. And we have volunteers going in. She's like, oh yeah, I have 10 I could give you right now. And I was like, well, she's already doing that job. So we just get now referrals from the social workers. We educate the homeless shelter on what our program is, and then we have the social workers make those referrals. We have a 3 strikes and you're out rule, which is like if you recommend a client who, let's say, example, doesn't answer the door when we're there, or there's 15 people living in the house and we thought there was 2, and like these kinds of things happen. Listen, homelessness is not an exact science, but if it gets to be a problem with a social worker, then we have a 3 strikes and you're out rule. And then we'll revisit that in a year. But so far, I think we've used it once in 13 years. It's a great, great system.
Yeah. Okay. Now we'll fast forward to
yada, yada.
Humble Design, where it's at now. Share an overview of what Humble Design is. Obviously, through your.
We've been talking for half an hour. People are like, what does she do? Like, I don't understand.
Well, through your personal story, you know, it be being founded in the reality of moving furniture into your friend's home, and she's just transitioning out of homelessness. Share an overview of what Humble Design is and where things are at now.
So you know what's beautiful about Humble Design is that we actually, what our program is the exact same level of service that our very first home was that I did for my friend. So if you envision a multiplication of that process, much faster, but with the same level of dignity and empathy, we treat every client as though they were our friend. We get a referral from a social worker of a family or an individual that's leaving a homeless shelter. As soon as the referral comes in, we meet with the family, usually on a Monday, and we meet with them, unless COVID prevents it, which we did a lot over Zoom, but we meet with the family in their space. The designers are the ones who do the intake interview. So 2 designers go down to the house or the apartment, and they say to the family or the individual, oh gosh, like, what was your year like? I bet you it was really hard. Like, what are your kids like? What is your family like? What do you envision doing in your space? Like, what kind of colors do you think about? Like, have you ever looked through magazines and fell in love with things? And these are questions, honestly, that are way more impactful sometimes than the actual furniture that we deliver, because we're looking at the other person as an equal, as a human being, and as somebody who is not just a social security number who's on government subsidies. Mm-hmm. If you find yourself in a homeless shelter, you have had the worst year of your life. Thank goodness they exist, but there are no more couches to surf. There's no more families to lean on. There's no more cars to sleep in. It is a heartbreaking decision to go into a homeless shelter. So when we start asking people like, hey, who are you as a person? And like, do you have asthma? And do you like music? And people just break down. And it breaks a lot of these barriers down for us. So we spend a lot of time, and then we measure the home, right? Measure all the walls and everything. And then we say to the individual, leave it to us. We got you. And so what I've heard at that point.
And they know they're moving into this new spot.
they're already in that spot,
They're already
right?
in
So
the spot.
they've been placed in by the social worker, and then that's when we get the call, right? We try to get them at the very beginning so they don't have to sleep on the floor for a prolonged period of time. But when we first started going, we've had people who were sleeping on the floor for 4 years in their place.
So outside of Humble Design, you have families moving into spots through the social system and then just ride it out as long as they have to with no furniture.
Forever. I mean, I've had grandmas who said that my grandkid is getting a bed, but her mom and me, we've never had a bed. Generationally, we've never had a bed. So that's really heartbreaking to hear. But I will say that, so people ask us, like, how do people maintain the house? How do people get into the housing? So there is a lot of people who have jobs who are in homeless shelters and who have bad credit, who landlord has raised the rent, who have had a bed bug situation and are able to afford an apartment. There are people who need a government subsidized apartment, but government subsidies don't pay for your full rent and they don't last forever. So you have to figure out how you're gonna manage that rent in a real way. So I would say in San Diego alone, there's about 100 people a week who get into housing who have nothing, just in San Diego. So we're talking about nationally, you can, blow that number out.
Yeah.
So,
And what's your presence here in San Diego?
so we have a warehouse downtown and we do 2 families a week at this point here in San Diego.
Okay. Yeah, the way I found out about Humble Design was my company, Sackcloth and Ashes, teamed up with another company here in San Diego, Pura Vida. We went to one of the houses and fully furnished it. We got to pick out all the stuff in the warehouse and then go and fully furnish this house. And we did it under like 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah. So
Is that how it normally is?
Absolutely. So what we
backed
do,
into U-Haul and they were like, it's game time. I felt like I was on a TV show.
it is a TV show. It's bananas, but we do it because we don't want to drag this thing out, right? And so the designers, there's 2 designers per house. They go in after they interview the family, they go back to the warehouse. Our warehouses are anywhere between 8,000 and 60,000 square feet, depending on what city you're in. They go in and the warehouses are filled with stuff that we've collected from the community, be it like individuals, people have donated stuff. It's nothing that we've purchased. We don't purchase anything.
All goes into the warehouse.
Goes into the warehouse and then it's organized by thousands of volunteers, like little busy bees, putting everything away and organizing it like a Bed Bath & Beyond of donated goods. So then the designers come in and they like frenetically frenzy this house together, right? And they have staging areas and they tag the furniture and then they start crafting. So the kid really likes Pokemon. I don't know, that's super dated.
Like, do they go through a full assessment? So you're picking out stuff that they are interested in, they want.
Oh yeah. Colors they want. Cartoon characters they like. Books they're into.
So do you treat it like if I hired an interior designer for my house?
Except better, because I'll tell you, if you hire an interior designer for your house, she's not going to grab you books. Like she's not going to reframe your family pictures. You know what I mean? Or sorry, I'm sexist. So, but yeah, we do all of that, like tip to tail. We put extra linens in the cabinets. We put extra silverware. Wow. We set the table for dinner, like everything. But so they craft, right? So they craft everything that doesn't exist. Then they bring down books, they bring out homework supplies, extra cleaning supplies, everything that would go in your house goes in our house. And then we load up the U-Haul, right? Our sponsor, U-Haul. And we load up the U-Haul and then the volunteers come the next day. We drive that U-Haul in like a couple of like vans filled with stuff down to the house. We ask the family to leave. And at this point, the family is like, oh, I'm going to get like a bed or 2, or I'm going to get like a couple of dishes that are mismatched, right? And we're like, great, low expectations, get out of here. And they go to school for the day, they go to their work for the day, go to their friend's house, whatever. We bananas that house. We come in with 10 volunteers and we hang the artwork, we make the beds, we move in all the furniture, we wipe everything down, we connect the cable box, we like do everything, hang all the photographs. And then they come home around 2 when the kids get home from school. And it is a life-changing moment. And you wouldn't think that like furniture is like, I don't know, high on the list of things that people really connect with. But 4 empty walls in a roof does not a home make. It just feels like transition, right? So when a family has had the worst year of their life, and they walk in and they get the key and they go into an empty room, like, okay, we're safe, we're good. But now what? Like, we don't have a TV, we don't have a table to sit at, we don't have anything. It's depressing. And waking up on the floor is depressing. So it usually ends up 50% of the time, they end up back into a homeless shelter. So when they walk into the house, and this is all the moment that your listeners are waiting for, right? I mean, you were there. What happens when they walk back in at 2
emotional.
o'clock?
Well, I mean, it was a family of 6. There's 4 kids, and they were all transitioning out of a shelter that they've been living out of. The dad works and everything. And I mean, leading up to that moment too, there's like, you know, the feeling of being on a TV show where they're like, you know, 15 minutes, you know, and you're just like, oh my God, we still have so much to do. Like, it feels like an impossible task. You know, I'm like nailing stuff into the wall. I'm like, I've never like swung a hammer, like, and like, you know, just the buildup of the whole thing. And then when the family gets there and they're standing and they're kind of like not knowing at all what to expect. And it was really special too. It was in December of 2019 when we did this. So it was Christmas time. And we put up a tree and they came in the presents and everything. And they came in and the kids walked in first. And the way the kids responded was the most emotional part, because a couple of them were like smiling out of like, and put their hands in their face in their hands. And then like one girl started tearing up, and it was just like, it was hard to really understand the feeling of walking into a newly furnished home during the holiday season and giving this family an opportunity to like be a family, specifically coming out of the situation that they were in, you know, and which I think they'd been in for a long time. So it's hard to comprehend because I've never been in that situation. I've never had to go from a place of feeling like I have nothing to walking into a warm, beautiful, decorated home. So it was a really special moment, and my team was blown away. And I've been all across the United States for the podcast and for my business, and I've gotten to sit down with a lot of nonprofit leaders, but there's nothing that I've seen that's like this and being done in this way, you know. So one of the things that I read that was really fascinating and beautiful was that you guys, the families that move into these homes, 99% success rate of staying in a home. Share about why you think that is. Like why such a high success rate? I mean, that's the level of success that we should be obviously paying attention to.
Yeah. So anecdotally, I can tell you that the feeling of ownership and feeling like something belongs to you and that you've had a hand in decorating and feels like the dream home that you would have put together for yourself, it makes people want to stay and find solutions to stay. When you move into a home, a lot of our families are victims of domestic violence who leave their house in the middle of the night with 2 trash bags, right? So they get into the house, it's empty, they're sleeping on the floor. Well, the place where they came from might have been awful and they might have been hurt there, but they have beds, they have a TV, they have the computer, they have games. And as time goes on, you're thinking to yourself, this place is awful and the sink is dripping and I have nothing. And was it so bad? And for the kids' sake, maybe we should just go back this one time. And average, you know, people go back to their abusers 8 times. And then you ask yourself, well, why 8 times? And it's because they die after the 9th, right? So for us to I'm going to cry again, to fully furnish a home, right? And to watch a family come in and to watch a kid get tears in their eyes means that they have carried the weight of what their life has been. I know the parents really think that they're doing a good job in protecting the kids, but the kids know. Mm-hmm. And so when a kid cries, we have a bunch of videos on our website of kids crying when they see their bed for the first time, 8-year-olds. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, damn, they were carrying so much in that moment. They didn't even know how much they were carrying and how depressing it is. And so they put on a happy face and they say, we're camping and it's okay. We're going to make it through and everything will be cool. And this is an awesome place. And then all of a sudden they see a bed with their name above it. And it's a sense of security that they haven't had. And it's a sense of happiness. So we like to say we get to deliver Christmas 13 times a week across the country, because social working and dealing with the homeless sector is so sad. And it's so many no's and so many stumbling blocks that just being able to provide a happy, joyful moment that people will remember for the rest of their lives. Even if our statistics weren't so great, it would still be a fantastic program, not just for the people who are receiving the furniture, but for the people like you who get to go down and like make that one-on-one connection. And
I didn't feel like I deserved it. I'm like watching it and I'm like, wow, I just got to be a part of, could potentially be like the highlight of this family's life.
Oh, you did.
You know?
You were.
What's amazing about the family staying in the home and wanting to stay off the streets or getting an opportunity to stay off the streets, I actually heard this from your organization. I think about it a lot. Is there's a difference between having a house and a home. What is the difference?
Dignity and empathy and pride. So we have this little thing that we have in the office, and it's like this ripple effect when you put a stone in water. So you decorate somebody's home in downtown Detroit, and then they end up having their family over for Thanksgiving, and then they end up meeting their community, and then they end up having an emergency place to go to when something in the community happens, right? So all of a sudden you've placed this one stone of stability, and it ripples out. So we've had families who now started their own nonprofit. We've had families who have generationally stopped poverty only because they feel that this temporary house that they were living in for a while is now their permanent home, and they start treating it that way. They start taking care of the exterior. They start asking their landlord, hey, is there a lease to own situation here? Hey, can I go to my neighborhood school, synagogue, church, and make connections? I'll just tell you one anecdotally. We had a mom who had a little boy, and he was kicked out of 3 schools. And so she had moved around quite a bit, and she ended up staying in this one house that we had furnished for her. And we check in 6 weeks, 6 months, and 1 year later. So when we checked in 1 year later, she goes, oh my goodness, my son has never been at one school this long. And the reason he was getting kicked out is because he's profoundly deaf. And we didn't stick around long enough in any one place for anybody to actually diagnose him. It took a year for somebody to notice in his school, like, oh my goodness, this is what's going on. And she's like, now we've got him in the right school. Now I have programs for him. And so, I've got to go to a lot of graduations. I've got to go to a lot of baby namings. But this was a story of absolute just 100% joy that you were able to stick around long enough to make connections and form community. And that's what she did. And it makes so much of a difference. I've been saying this over and over again, so I'm going to say it again. We need to stop thinking so big, and we need to start thinking small. We need to start thinking about our neighbors and start planting routes and talking to people. There has been a loss of community. We used to go to Rotary, and we used to go to our Girl Scouts, and decline on all of those fronts across the country. No groups are doing well. We have made community within Humble Design. If you go into our warehouse, that community exists now in its own little pod, and we're gathering people. We're not losing membership. We're gathering people. And so we're having to find new ways of community, and this is so important.
I usually save this question for the end of the podcast, but I'm going to ask it now. With the podcast called Love Your City, interviewing people doing grassroots work in their communities, why do you feel like it's important for people to take action locally? Like the micro model that you're talking about, why do you feel like that is the way forward?
It's the only way forward, in my opinion. I have yet to see large global initiatives make as much difference as you walking over to your neighbor and asking them if they're okay. We have gotten so far distance from each other. Maybe it's the internet, maybe it's COVID, maybe it's just the way of the world, and we're finding that we're more cynical, right, as a society. But it's really hard to hate people up close. And we have had very little opportunity to be up close with one another. So I have a very strong political leaning. And it's very easy for me to sit on my couch and watch TV and scream at it. It's really difficult to do that when I'm sitting across from somebody from the other side and talking to them like this. Like, not that you're from the other side of my political leanings, but it's very hard. The only way that we're going to solve what's going on in the United States, I don't know, I can't tell you what's going on around the rest of the world, but what I see here in the 5 cities in the United States is to go and check on your stinking neighbor. Mm-hmm. That's it. I mean, like, that's what Humble Design does in a weird way. Like, we just go and check on our neighbors and make sure that they're okay. And it's hard to erase that connection once you have it. You can't erase it. Once you've been down there and saw that family, whether or not you keep in touch with that family or, you have a connection now to people in San Diego who don't have it a lot. And you can't erase that connection.
Yeah, how do you do that in a way where it's not you trying to be the hero necessarily?
White savior complex?
Yeah. Yeah, how do you do that? Because I think about my own neighbor, and, if I went over and I'm like checking on them and I'm like, hey, how are you guys doing? Is there anything you guys need? It's like it comes across as a friendly way, but it also could come across as like,
oh, that's different.
Who are you? Who are you to, how do you do that in a dignifying way? How do you approach somebody on a local level that you're really trying to like help, not offend.
I struggle with that too, but it's not going to stop me from helping people. It's not going to stop me from asking if people need help. And if that is true and I offend somebody, it is my absolute moment to stop, take stock, and apologize because it's coming from a good place. However, going and saying like, hey, I'm your neighbor, like, doesn't mean like walking next door to your, it might look like walking next door to your neighbor, but it also might look like saying, okay, I feel afraid to walk up to a homeless person on the street. That is a scary proposition for me.
And could potentially be actually dangerous.
Oh, absolutely. And like I said, that 2% of people that you see on the street have mental illness and drug addiction. So those are things that like, that is a scary proposition. But then there's no in between of like, how do then I approach a homeless family or somebody who's on the cusp of being homeless without feeling like I'm putting myself in danger? Why is there no in between? And it's not because it doesn't exist. It's because we haven't walked outside of our house and be like, oh, there's tons of organizations right now that I can say, hey, I am in this neighborhood and I want to make sure that people in my neighborhood are taken care of. What can I do? If you can't give money, that's great. That's fine. There are places that you can give time, that you can give energy, that you can give your stuff to. Mm-hmm. And just that small amount of effort actually gets you outside of yourself. This is what I do when I'm depressed. And I, just like anybody else, will fall into the moments of self-doubt and depression. And I have to do something for somebody else, at least a small little thing to get outside of my head and get outside of myself, because there is a whole world out there who needs you. Mm-hmm. And it is so sad to me for you to think that your talents are going to waste when all you have to do is literally take a drive down to the center of your town and figure out if there's somebody who you can help. And it might not work out the first time and not be a good fit, but just try to check on your little neighbors. And in a big city, that's hard, I think. Mm-hmm. But in rural towns, it's much easier.
Yeah. And to clarify, like, neighbor might not be somebody next door to you, it's somebody in your community. When it comes to like giving back locally, and that's a big reason why I started loveyourcity.org, was it's hard to find what's going on around you. And you can visit our website, loveyourcity.org, search your city. We've launched in over 100 cities, and you can see what nonprofit organizations are in your community and how you can get involved.
This is it. You built it. That's it.
And so that particular resource was important for me to launch almost for my own self, or what, as I always say, like the 19-year-old version of myself, looking to get involved, not knowing where to start. And yeah, I think a lot of people, to your point earlier, like in Detroit, was a lot of people want to make a difference and they don't know where to start. Mm-hmm. And the most effective work, and as you said, the only effective work is local.
That's it.
We got to approach it local.
Look at those little libraries that people start. And then there's like stuff libraries and food libraries. And I saw it in Seattle. I was in Seattle the other week that somebody set up tons of tents with clothing and food. No questions asked. Don't need to fill out a grant. If you need something here, just take it. And people brought so much stuff.
Yeah. Well, it's been I'm on an interesting journey now because I've been doing the podcast now for almost a year. And at the end of this year, I'm going to pause it just for a little bit to refocus back on my own community. I live here in San Diego. And now the big question is, I've been interviewing people and wanting to help elevate stories of people that are doing good work in their communities. I'm going to take a little bit of a pause and ask the same question to myself, what am I doing in my local community? And so as I've been sorting through that, I'm looking at, okay, should I go serve a meal on Wednesday mornings at humanity showers? Or should I use my skill set to come alongside an organization or a person and help in that way? And so it's interesting that volunteerism, I used to see volunteerism as like, oh, I'm going to go and serve a meal, which is great. But I'm looking at it more practically now, where I'm like, where can I truly make an impact and how can I be effective? And I'm looking at what skill set can I bring to an organization or a nonprofit or an individual who's doing good work in my community, and use that skill set to help further their particular mission.
What a shame that we teach kids in school, like, find a job that works for you, that makes you happy, and that you feel like you're you're good at, but we don't teach that in volunteerism. We just drag them down to the food shelter and have them like box cans of stuff for Thanksgiving. We never say like, hey, if you're really good at graphic design, making a logo for your local nonprofit is probably your best way to help them impact,
Probably
right?
needed. Yeah.
Incredibly needed. I'm the only nonprofit that I've met that has been started by a marketing individual. Like it is absolutely needed, and I need it. So I would say like volunteering is like dating. You've got to find the one that works for you. And if you don't, you're going to lose passion and they're going to lose you. And if you really want to stick with something long term, find something that makes sense for you. I guarantee you it's out there.
Yeah, either dive in and get involved, or if you know what your skill set is, try to use your skill set to help further the mission of whatever you're passionate about getting involved in. I was joking earlier about, I felt like I was in a TV show, you know, being a part of that process of furnishing the house and everything. But you actually...
Not a joke.
Not a joke. It actually is a TV show. Take us through that journey. Like when did you get approached to actually do a TV show of these move-ins and the whole kind of concept of taking your nonprofit model and then turning it into a storytelling platform?
So you and I had talked about like what it is to exploit stories versus what it is to tell people's stories genuinely. Yep. Coming from a marketing and advertising background, I would go into the houses and say to the families, is it okay if I film you? We have them sign a piece of paper that it's okay. And then say to them, this is why I'm filming you. I'm filming you so you can tell your story to make other people feel hopeful that there's a way out. Do you want to tell your story? And either they say, I'm not comfortable with that, or yes. So we started filming the families who were cool with us filming them.
Just as a nonprofit? Like
yeah, because I'm from marketing.
Doing your own content.
I want to tell the story, right? I know the value. And did you go scroll at night just looking for like happy cat videos? I just want to feel good before I go to bed. Mm-hmm. I'm not looking for like war and destruction videos. I'm looking for like a stupid TikTok of somebody doing something positive, right? So I'm like, oh, I could be that video, right? So I particularly like the ones where they go up to people on the street, ask them for food, and then when they get the homeless people give them food, then they give them like $500. I like cry like a baby because I'm like, oh my God, there's good people out there. So I started filming these videos. One of the videos I filmed, you guys can look it up. It's Dayers Gets a Bed for Christmas, and it got like 20 million views. Like it went bananas. Inside Edition picked it up. It was on Lad Bible. I was on Good Morning America. It was just a bananas time.
And it's something you just posted on YouTube. And then what was the process of it going viral? Did you wake up the next morning, or was it after a week you're like, oh my God, have you guys looked at the video lately? It got 20,000 views last night.
If you guys get a call from Carter's, like that, you know you've made it big, right? They want to buy it and they want to monetize it. I'm like, oh, this is going to be big. So we got a call for somebody to like monetize it for us. And then we got a call from Inside Edition 2 days later, and it hit like Facebook first, and then we were on YouTube, but I think within 3 days it had 10.5 million views. It's crazy. And every Christmas they like drag it out and replay it, and we get another million views. How
did you feel about it? Like, were you like, was this an exciting time, or were you just like, oh my God? Because sometimes when it comes a little unexpected, you're like, it's a little bit of a scramble mode, and you're kind of like, holy shit, are we ready for this?
I live in scramble mode.
Okay, cool. So you were already familiar with the...
My company may not love that mode, but I live for that mode. Yeah. So I was like, we're going to get more people on the phones, and some of it didn't materialize, whatever. Yeah. Some of it did. Good Morning America was like really cool. So anyway.
So you rode the wave.
We rode the wave, and we had a couple production companies say like, hey, I think this is like a good model for a TV show. I'm like, yeah, duh. And then, so we did a couple sizzles, never went anywhere. Then we had a neighbor of ours in Detroit who was a serious filmmaker. And she's like, I can make this sizzle for you and I can help sell it. So she did. Amy, if you're out there listening, thank you very much, from Radish Group. And she did, and she sold it we had a production company sell it to the CW and BYU TV. And we had 26 episodes on Saturday mornings in the educational TV time slot that just took the viewer basically through the process in a half an hour of finding the family, interviewing the family, picking for the family, decorating for the family, and then watching the family come home. It was a lovely little TV show. It was not as real world as what we do because it was an educational TV time slot. And I was telling you before that 26 episodes in 6 weeks will grind a person to dust.
I mean, what is that? Is that like two shoots a day or what?
Yeah. So morning we would do the one family, afternoon, we would decorate for the second family, and then we would go back and forth between the two families, so 2 families a week. And then we would work basically 6 days a week, and then we had to, the last 2 weeks, I think we had to do 3 families to make that 26. And I think there's a couple best ofs in there. So.
And can people still watch these episodes?
Yep, byutv.org. If you Google Welcome Home on BYU, they have them all online. And I would appreciate if you watch them because my mom needs some company. She's the only one who's actually watched
She's binging them.
No, we had about 1.5 million viewers on the CW during the weekends, but 1.5 million viewers in the breadth of the United States is like my mom and her friends.
Yeah.
Your
mom has a lot of friends.
It was a great little show. But yeah, it was a show. We nominated for 2 Emmys. Lost to Oprah, y'all.
Share the wealth, you know what I mean?
My mom, if you guys ever troll my social media, my mom stole an Emmy in the lobby of...
Legend.
She is a legend. So she ran around with the Netflix Emmy, I believe, and wouldn't give it back because I deserved the Emmy according to her in 3 glasses of wine.
That's like some Kanye Taylor Swift moment.
Oh, yeah. No, she had some white wine in her and was classic. I have the best picture of her ever stealing that Emmy.
Oh, my gosh. So you didn't win that one.
Did not win the Emmy twice.
But your mom thought you deserved it.
Whatever. She's my best.
She ended up in jail and she's fine now.
She's back now. They were all very lovely to her because she is one of those people that just like emotes friendliness and happiness even when she's stealing your crap. But here it is. Oh, you guys want to see? I'll try and post it. Legit stealing an Emmy.
That's amazing.
Yeah. See the white.
She's so happy.
See
too.
the white wine in the other hand.
She looks like she won it.
Yeah. She did because she stole it out of a velvet box.
Wow.
Yeah. So didn't win the Emmy.
Did you take that photo?
I did.
That's incredible. You're like, Mom, what is that? She's like, it's an Emmy. I took it. You're like, stay there. I need to take this photo.
She's about to say, go run. That's the next thing out of her mouth. Turn around, run. I'm like, Mom, we can't actually steal
really
it. Can't really steal it. Netflix will come for me. Maybe that's why I don't have a season 2. Blame my mom. There's been 2 things that have come from that TV show. One is I know what I don't want to do. I don't want to be in an educational time slot, if at all possible. And I really, really don't want to whitewash or glamorize families' stories. I wanted to tell an authentic story. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's a lot more to it. I think we need more time and more breath to do it. And so we're talking about season 2 right now. And one of the things I'm really pushing hard for is how can we evoke empathy and dignity for homeless people if we don't tell the real story and have people connect with the family in a real way?
Yeah. With the process of shooting a show, obviously, like, apart from like going back to back to back to back and having a crazy schedule, did you enjoy the process of creating TV?
So much. Yeah. Honestly, I just like going down to the houses. What I do is, you saw my office. My office is a 100 square foot space with no windows. I'm not joking. That is where I do most of my work. I do all the background stuff. I raise money. I have to raise an insane amount of money every year. And like, I do all this background work. I very rarely get to go down to the houses. So for 6 weeks, I got to do my favorite part of this, which is go down and meet the families. And I cry genuinely cry every time. But I was dehydrated, like really, really dehydrated by the end of all of it. So I think that I enjoyed, the TV was fun and the people I work with were amazing. But I just enjoyed actually doing the houses again.
Yeah. How can people support Humble Design now? You guys are in 5 cities.
Yeah.
What are the 5 cities again?
So we're in Detroit, Chicago, Cleveland, Seattle, and San Diego. And I say that slowly and intentionally, not for your viewers or your listeners, but for me, because I have to do it on a map. So we have spread so fast and so quickly because people really want to volunteer for us. They want to be like, I want to do this in my city. And also, people are desperate for this in their city, that they need the furniture, right? Our statistics are that every city in the United States should have this program to keep people out of the revolving door of homelessness. We've figured that we've saved billions of dollars to the state of Michigan from keeping people out of the system, right? Just 50% go back into the system. Only 1% of ours go back into the system. Do the math. I think it's $40,000 a year per individual who is homeless, right? So times we've done 8,000, right? That's really back of the napkin math. However, I will say growth is so hard, and we cannot find another organization that's apples to apples who have done this way, who's grown into cities the way that we have. We've learned a lot, and we know what it takes to do it. And really what it takes to be in your city, if you're listening and you're not in one of our cities, is we need financial support to do that. We have the system down. We've got it down.
To hire the
science.
right people to kind of be the home base.
I can throw together a humble design. Like, I know every angle and every bit and piece that needs to happen. We can start doing families within the first year. But it takes such a financial investment for the warehouse, for the staffing, for the insurance, for all that stuff to get up and going.
How much is it for one city? So if I'm in Portland, how much does it cost to fund and get that up and running in my city?
1.2 to 1.7 million over a 3-year span.
Okay.
So the reason that it fluctuates that way is because warehouse is a big contingency.
Yeah.
However, I will say that this is my philosophy. If we start getting to the point where we're spending more money per house than it would make sense to give the family the money to go shopping for that furniture, we stop making sense. So we have economies of scale. As we get bigger, our cost per house comes down. So our goal right now, our goal set is to get to the $3,500 mark per house. When we start doing 3 homes a week, we fit comfortably into that range. When we start, we're at the $5,000, per house mark. So over 3 years, if we have that funding, that's why we say over 3 years, is because within that 3-year period, we're looking to get to 3 houses a week.
What's your hope when you think about, 5 years from now? When you think down the road, you think of the growth that this could potentially have. Are you thinking you want to be in 7 cities, 10 cities? Like what do you dream about when you think of the organization and the future of it?
So there's 2 answers to that. One is my audacious dream that nobody needs us anymore. Put me out of business. Joe Biden, if you're listening, just put me out of business.
But we need the boots on the ground. We need the structure. The Joe Bidens of the world should be backing you, not necessarily the government replacing you.
No, I don't want the government to replace me. I want the government to address homelessness. The deluge of people coming down the pike. I am sticking my finger in a dike with you and with all the other nonprofits that have sprung up. But make no mistake, there's 10 million homeless coming down the pike in the next 10 years. There is no amount of furniture that I'm going to be able to provide that's going to fix that scenario.
What do we need? If you could say anything right now to Joe Biden and the people that are on his team that are specifically having conversations about homelessness in the United States, what would you say?
This is a really loaded question, but I'm going to answer super honestly.
Bring it.
Number 1, there are no corporations that should be holding on to massive single-family homes. If there is an organization in Canada or Japan or even in the United States that holds more than 45 single-family homes, they should not be allowed to exist. Sorry. If you have an investment property and you live in your town, great. You're investing in your town. You have a rental property. You're absolutely entitled to make money that way. If you have 75,000 rental properties in the state of Florida and your company's in Canada and you decide to raise the rent by 2%, this is a real issue. This is causing homelessness. We're pricing people out of the single family homes, and very few people in this country now own their homes. Many people rent, and we can't accrue wealth that way. We are just shrinking the middle class to nothing this way, and we're pumping all of that money to these large corporations. Whether the Supreme Court says they're people or not, they are not acting like people. They're acting like corporations. That being said, that's number 1. I would just put some laws in place that these large holdings are not appropriate for the United States. Number 2, what I would say is that this hoarding of wealth that we have witnessed since 1980s isn't working for us. When the top 1% of this country holds more wealth than the bottom 50%, there is no place to go but a brick wall. We're not heading towards anything fun right now. We're not heading towards anything great. We're not heading towards resolving the issues. We are heading towards a brick wall because we haven't looked at this hoarding of wealth in a real way. We're all terrified of actually saying it out loud. I read something online that once you make $999 million, you get a little plaque that says you win capitalism and you have a park named after you. But that's it. No billionaires. We're done. I can't see this really happening without a massive redistribution of wealth in this country. And the one way to do that is to tax them. You need to tax them, and you need to encourage them to start rebuilding into the systems that made them billionaires. When we had billionaires back in the revolution and, back in the 30s and the 40s, they built libraries, they built universities, they built roads, they built bridges. Now we're building rocket ships to Mars. Like, we need to convince these individuals, and there's 20 of them, to reinvest in the system that made them. And until we can figure out how to do that, there is no way that my organization, your organization, the 1.5 million charities in this country are ever going to be able to solve for the issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting perspective, and it's something that I think about a lot because I am an advocate for progress. I'm an advocate for entrepreneurship. I'm an advocate for using good business to build sustainable long-term solutions. And so therefore I am in support of a lot of entrepreneurial people. When you reach a level of success as an entrepreneur, when you've built a company that is an extremely influential platform and has a lot of resources, is the model to help inspire them and help educate them on knowing where those funds should be invested? Or do we have to rely on the government to, in some regard, distribute their wealth for them?
So I am graduating from Harvard Extension School with my master's in May. That was a huge name drop for me. This is coming from a person who barely graduated high school, y'all.
Congrats.
Thank you. My mom and dad are somewhere clutching their pearls, very excited for me. So here's what I've learned. That everybody has heard the term "Make America Great Again." Not going to attach any meaning to that. But like when you ask, like, when was America great? They'll usually say somewhere around the 50s or the 60s, right? If you look at the corporate tax rate in the 50s or the 60s, we're at 75% corporate tax rate. Individual tax rates are hovering 63. The reason we were so great is because we were a socialist country. I mean, if you tax people 75% on corporate taxes right now, we would be called socialists. There's no way we could get away with that. Right now, we're at 17% to 23%? The reason that we have infrastructure crumbling, we have education crumbling, we have no health care, we have no unions, if you're in the middle class right now, you are lucky. If you can afford 2 vacations to Florida a year and 2 cars in the driveway in a 1-income household, you are an anomaly in this country. There is a real reason for that. It's because the government decided in the 50s and the 60s that they were going to tax people making money and invest in the country. And we all felt like we were part of that. Like we all felt, all right, we're spending money on each other. Now it's such rugged individualism that if the government doesn't say to large corporations, we're going to make you do this with some government intervention, it's pretty clear. I can think of Patagonia that's had some altruistic leanings. Amazon's not going to fork over their shareholders' profit to make the world a better place. Sorry.
Well, on that note, when it comes to like the businesses and the corporate model, what would be your advice to the CEOs running large companies right now? You've had the opportunity to work with large companies who have an influence, who have resources. What is your advice to large corporations who are like, we actually want to make an impact, not we want to leverage impact for our own save face marketing opportunities?
Funny you should ask. I have an answer to that too. There has been a new model. So in the 80s, when greed was good, Yale and Harvard had their business schools, and it was just shareholder profits. That's what they pushed. Greed is good, shareholder profits. So now there's like that switching. There's been some changing of like, hey, we want to redo those definitions of like actually corporations are supposed to be for people. Citizens United, I'm not sure if your listeners are familiar with that, but that needs to be overturned immediately. Corporations are not people. They cannot be treated as people. And it's been a real problem with dark money in the political system. If you are a CEO of a corporation, you're listening to this right now, and you're doing well, the average American gives 3.5% of their yearly income to charity. That's, if you can look it up, it's pretty standard, 3.5%. If the corporations that I'm speaking of, and all the corporations in the United States, made that exact same pledge, if the billionaires that I'm talking about, the top 10 families in the United States made that exact same pledge, they would give more than all of the other Americans combined. If Target shifted their giving structure by 1%, it would do more good than all of the nonprofits that they have raised collectively across the United States combined. These companies are so huge and so massive that the slightest shift inside their company can do way, way more good than all of us running our wheels and burning out here in the nonprofit space. When people ask me, should I go nonprofit? I said, go to for-profit, make a ton of money, and then give it to a nonprofit. You'll have way more impact sitting on their board. I mean, listen, you and I know this firsthand. There's no money in nonprofit. We're not pulling in big bucks here, right? Somehow we've decided that we shouldn't be paying people good money to change the world. But I think that as it stands right now, if you could make a 3.5% pledge, which people expect everybody to give, that would make such a huge difference in the world.
And trying to find as best solutions as possible to support, right?
Yeah, I mean,
money.
everybody has their own rigmarole of what they want to support, right? Find something that is for you, but just to make that pledge of 3.5% of your company's income goes to making the world a better place, it would make a huge difference in the world. Mm. I just want them to choose Humble Design. Make your 3.5% a Humble Design donation.
You can visit humbledesign.org.
And a sackcloth and ashes. And also...
No, we're a for-profit. We're a for-profit.
I will just say this, though. Walking into the warehouse and seeing all the blankets in there and how gorgeous that is, and then putting it on people's beds at the end of their beds and how lovely that is, it is a dignity piece. It is not something that is like... somebody didn't want this anymore and it doesn't seem great. It is gorgeous and they're new in box and they, are beautiful.
Thank you for that. And thank you for spending time. I really enjoyed our conversation and I really think the work you're doing is extremely unique, deserves to be supported. And I'm really, really inspired by your work.
Can I ask you one question before we go?
Yeah.
Okay. So we were talking before about telling authentic stories and like how you and I have to tiptoe somehow around being authentic and then exploiting people's stories. So have you, in your mind, created a solution or a workaround or a guideline for like, how do we have empathy and dignity and tell people's stories so people feel connected and people feel like we're all working together, and then also not feel like you're exploiting individuals and people to raise your brand?
Yeah. And specifically through sackcloth.
Yeah.
Well, a big part of it is understanding, and I shared this with a lot of different companies, is that your company shouldn't be in the narrative. Your company shouldn't be the hero. And a lot of companies right now they're trying to be the hero. They're trying to be the one that comes in and saves the day on a particular social problem. The truth is there's a lot of people out there that are already doing the work. They're already all boots on the ground, solving problems and creating solutions. And as a company, instead of us trying to be the problem solver, is to find the people who are solving the problems and help elevate them and tell their stories. I started this because I started doing blanket drops around the United States, visiting homeless shelters and programs and getting a front row seat, some of the best work being done in the States. And I'm like, why aren't people telling their stories? Like their stories are, we're not quick in the media to talk about all the things that are working and to tell these people's stories. How can we use our platform as a company to tell these people's stories? So I started filming it. Similar story, beginning to you, where I'm like, I'm going to go to these homeless shelters and start filming my experiences of, delivering blankets and helping tell these people's stories. And so that's when I really wanted to focus the lens on the solutions, not necessarily the individuals experiencing homelessness or anything like that. It started with, let's find who's doing incredible work and highlight their story and their program or their solution. And then I had always had a vision to start street stories, which was how can we tell dignifying stories of people on the street? And I felt the same way. I didn't want my company to be the one that goes out with a camera, shoots photos or videos of people on the street and be like, tell us your story. I ended up coming across a guy named Jordan Verdeen, who I've had on this podcast, who was already taking...
Amazing photographer.
Yeah, amazing. He's here in San Diego, and he was already taking over 500 portraits of people on the street and telling their stories and writing their story down and sharing it online. You can check out his stories, Jordan Verdeen, Verdin. So I asked him if Sackcloth and Ashes could sponsor him in sharing the stories, paying him, and sharing the stories that he's already sharing through his platform. So similar to like how Nike sponsors athletes, like I want my company to kind of come alongside artists and solutionists and sponsor them and their work. And so I want to tell the stories that are already there, that are already unfolding, and come alongside and elevate stories that are already in the works.
So my question there is, George Carlin once said that we'll never solve homelessness because there's no money in it. So if that's the system that we live in, and we know that to be true right now until the system changes some way or another, how can we make money for a corporation by solving homelessness? And to do that, is it, hey, brand X, we'll tell your story in a really authentic, clean way for social media, and you can borrow some of that goodwill to get more people to buy into your brand or to get more people to come to your company. You know, people want to work with companies that have a good community presence, and therefore we'll move the needle for you, and then you'll create a long-term relationship with us in solving homelessness. And as ugly as that sounds on the page, it's the only way, I think, in this moment that we can create massive financial donations from corporations and long-term relationships with corporations if we show them that we have value to them as well. And the public is the only people who create that value. If they put pressure on a corporation to do good for the community, or they're only going to buy from them if they do good for the community, that's the pressure that we're hoping that the public now is shifting towards. But it does feel icky.
Yeah, so the way that I describe it to a company, we moved out of a season of success-driven companies to cause marketing. And are you familiar with cause marketing?
Sure.
Yeah. So we moved from success-driven model where companies are like, we're only in it to make money and, you know, make as much money as possible, to cause marketing. We're going to still make money, but we're going to do cause marketing, which is look at all the amazing work that we're doing as a company. We see that in like Super Bowl commercials and stuff, you know, it's everywhere, right? Look at all the amazing work that we're doing as a company. The next evolution, I believe, here, as like we're entering into it right now, is we're moving from cause marketing to marketing a cause. And the difference is look at all the amazing work that I'm doing, and marketing a cause is look at all the amazing work that they're doing. And you're using your company and your platform and your resources to help elevate an organization that's outside of your company that may or may not revert back to more service or more sales. And I do think that that's the evolution. I think that companies have the ability to use their platform and their resources to come alongside solutions like Humble Design to support and elevate the work and the story that you're doing. Marketing,
I think you're a rarity. I think that you are a truly altruistic, good human being. And I think that people behind corporations are good, altruistic human beings, but corporations are not people.
Yeah, I would agree to that to some level, but it's been interesting to have one foot in getting to be boots on the ground, seeing all these solutions, and then one foot in all these board meetings. And like I get just as much as I get a front row seat at homeless shelters and programs, I get a front row seat at meeting all the top executives in the United States running all these companies. And so I get to have conversations with them. And there are a lot of really good people in these boardrooms. It's not like everyone's sitting in there, like we almost kind of picture these boardrooms like they're just plotting to take advantage.
They're good people.
There's a lot of good people, and there's a lot of people that are like, how can we utilize this company? We have a responsibility. Yeah. You know, and then there's the people on the team that are like, what's going to be a great ROI, you know, because they still are a business at the end of the day. But I do think that there's a significant amount of money in the United States. I mean, we're donating billions of dollars every year, right, to nonprofits. The question is, as these problems are getting worse, is this strategy effective? And are we donating the money to the right organizations? It's easy to give to the big national global nonprofits that are showing up at the top of Google. But why I started the journey with Love Your Cities, I want corporations and individuals to support local. I want them to support grassroots. I want them to support the people who have been doing the work for a long period of time right in their community, who actually know how to approach this particular problem in this geographic location. And I think companies can come alongside grassroots organizations. That would be my biggest hope in these conversations with companies, and hopefully leading by example in my company, where we are using our platform to highlight grassroots organizations that are doing good work in their communities and give people an opportunity to support them.
And we're all pieces of the puzzle, right? So my organization, while we really connect the community with homeless individuals and we make that connection and we make people feel empathy and dignity, we're not placing people in homes. There needs to be another organization that we partner with to make that happen. But collectively, we create a full picture, hopefully, right? A continuum of care that actually is solving the situation rather than just putting a Band-Aid on it. And so when you highlight people in your area with Love Your City, it actually highlights the puzzle pieces that are making this work. When you give to a large global organization, they are so spread so wide and so far and so thin, you actually don't know where your donation is going to go.
And the chances are that definitely isn't coming back being reinvested into your community.
100%
you know what I'm
no.
saying? So that's where it's like,
no.
you know, the local model is, and we agree on this, it is the most effective, and if not the only way to make true progress with a lot of the social problems that we're dealing with right now. So thank you so much for the work that you're doing.
I dragged this out.
No,
I appreciate
love
you.
This so much. I love this so much. I'll end with this one question. It's a challenging question. On a scale from 1 to 10, where are you at with your interior designing right now, your skills?
Oh my God, I'm like a 2. I'm terrible at it. No, I really rely on my designers. They're so good and I appreciate them so much, but do not lead me to interior design.
That's a good leader that delegates right here. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. And yeah, really excited to stay in touch.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Love Your City podcast. If you want to find ways to get involved in your community, you can visit loveyourcity.org. If you have any questions or recommendations of grassroots leaders or nonprofits that we should be aware of, email us at media@loveyourcity.org.